My name is Dr. Iain Stuart. I'm a historical archaeologist and an industrial archaeologist working in Australia, primarily on the east coast of Australia, and based in Sydney, which is the largest but not the capital city of Australia. This talk is about Sunny Corner and the blowhard yank, and it talks about the introduction of silver smelting to New South Wales and to Australia. In the late 1870s, miners in New South Wales began to explore the silver deposits in the state. While at this point Australia had a wealth of experience in mining, it was primarily in the realm of gold mining. Gold ore required comparatively simple processing to extract the gold. In contrast, there was virtually no practical experience in silver mining. So while Australian miners had the expertise to extract the ores, they had little idea how to process them. This paper aims to throw some light on the way in which silver ore processing technology developed in Australia. It focuses on one aspect, that of the process of technological transfer of silver mining technology. It looks at one of the methods of technological transfer, the role of the imported expert, in this case, a blowhard yank, John di Monte. Technological transfer is of course great interest to the industrial archaeologist wanting to make a contribution to history. The physical and documentary evidence of the technology being transferred provides an independent line of evidence beyond that available to the documentary-focused historian. Nevertheless, a great care and logical argument is needed to clarify the process of technological transfer. There is a series, I think, of three key questions. What exactly is being transferred? What is the mechanism for transfer? And where the technology is being transferred to and from. The role of the single individual in the transfer process, the so-called great man, has rightly been criticised by historians. Nevertheless, in the 19th century, there was an emphasis on the great engineers like Brunel and Telford, even though close examination shows that they were leaders of teams or were part of a group where technology was being developed. Beyond the individual, there was also the rise of the class of professional experts, notably the engineers, who disseminated their information by a wide range of means, technical and professional literature, training at centres of education, and being on the site in remote locations. The latter method, being the person on the spot directing activities, has been highlighted by some key studies of technological transfer as being a critical factor in successful transfer. The expert brings particular skills and know-how to the situation that is not generally available from textbooks. This talk's focused on one such individual and his impact on silver mining in Australia. The site I'm talking about is Sunny Corner, and this is a sort of a map showing Sydney, and then to the west you can see Sunny Corner. I point out the town of Bathurst, which is was the focus for gold mining in New South Wales when gold was officially discovered following the return of Australians from the west coast in San Francisco. They then started to look for gold, and that's where they worked, Bathurst and Orange. Sunny Corner was a small gold mining village located on Mitchell Creek, midway between Bathurst and Lithgow in New South Wales. By the mid-1870s, the lease was worked as a gold mine until it was thought to be worked out. The lease was then purchased by the three Hurley brothers in partnership with a Sydney solicitor, Mr. John Shepherd, in 1879. While there was still gold to be won, there were clearly deposits of Gossan, quartz, galena and zinc blende in the zone of mineralisation, which were assayed as yielding payable silver. The question was how to make the ore yield the silver. Their first attempt was to run the ore through the existing gold treatment plant. It failed. The owners of the Sunny Corner mine then sought advice from within New South Wales and went to the great Cobar copper mines. The experts at the copper miners said it would be impossible to get the silver out, so they turned to Great Britain. In 1881, Shepherd arranged for a shipment of ore to be processed in England, reportedly at Swansea. John Hurley travelled with the ore to London, primarily to raise capital for other mining ventures. And he also consulted with UK experts. On his way home, Hurley travelled via the Nevada silver mines and San Francisco. Subsequently, Hurley met Charles Carlo, the American consul to New South Wales, on the steamer from San Francisco to Sydney. They were convinced that smelting ore was the best approach to the Sunny Corner problem. In Sydney, Hurley tried to unsuccessfully raise capital for the mine, and then in 1883 left for Queensland, eventual insolvency and a career in Parliament. Carlo, however, still persisted with his interest in the mine and persuaded the owners to send a further sample of ore for analysis to John Monte, an American engineer based in San Francisco and apparently an experienced silver smelter. This is the only photo we've been able to get of John Monte, and I might point out that it's from Ancestry.com. His descendants believe this is him. The history and education of John Monte in America is unclear, and I would love to know more about this because it's actually critical in understanding the technological transfer process. Did he actually know anything to transfer? His father apparently was a New York senator, and it's suggested that he was born in New York in 1846. He may have originally been in the grocery business, but so far no details of his education or training have been located. He may have had some expertise in silver mining, probably in the Eureka district of Nevada, where the silver smelting using water-jacked furnaces developed in the 1860s. In the 1880s, he was living in San Francisco and had some association with the Pacific Iron Works. Newspapers in Australia claim him to have been the president of a large association, and Monte once mentioned this as being the Pacific Smelting Works, but we've been unable to really verify this. Monte arrived in Sydney from San Francisco in March 1884, and the next few months he undertook three main tasks. He formed a company with Carlo called the New South Wales and Queensland Smelting Company. He patented in all Australian states and New Zealand 3 patents, one for the improvement of ore smelting furnaces, one for the construction of air blast furnaces, and one for an improved process of treating finely divided aphorous and argentiferous metal prior to smelting it. He also supervised the erection of his own design, supposedly his own design, a 60-ton probit furnace, which in fact was actually an American patent, but Monte seemed to sort of claim this was his, as well as 2 smaller furnaces, which the Sunny Corner Mining Company imported from the Pacific Iron Works at San Francisco. The Sunny Corner work was critical in developing Monte's business ventures across Australia. The mine owners had agreed to the following terms. Monte was to receive half of the first 5,000 pounds of bullion produced and 2,500 more at the end of 90 days consecutive smelting at the rate of 50 tonnes a day, the furnace being guaranteed by them to return 90% of the bullion proved by assay to be contained in the ore. Thereafter, the erectors were to receive a royalty of 4 shillings on each tonne of ore smelted for the next 3 years. This agreement seems to be the standard agreement with Monte's companies and had the advantage from the mine's perspectives of requiring little cash up front. Monte imported some American experts to help with the erection of the plant and to supervise the smelting. They also helped erect the 2 20-tonne furnaces imported from the Pacific Iron Works, which were declared operational in August 1844. The larger smelter, with a charge of 60 tonnes, usually called the probit smelter, was operational in December 1884. And here we have a rather lovely photo of the mine. I'm not sure whether you can see. There's the actual furnace. These are the mine workings running up the gully. The actual main adit is actually way up here. And then there are some associated works, the assay office, and various other bits and pieces scattered up and down the valley. The valley now has changed a little bit because they actually rebuilt the whole ore processing equipment and had it installed up roughly around behind that gum tree. So The basic process is, to go into it in detail is probably a bit too long for this talk, but the water jacket furnace is a blast furnace where the jacket surrounds the hottest zone in the structure, the jacket cooling the zone by circulating water through the jacket, which allowed the furnace to stay in service for long periods of time and to be repaired in situ. The water jacket furnace was refined in the 1860s to the 1880s in America. Following the smelting, the silver was separated from lead by the process of cupellation using the so-called English method in a reverberatory cupelling furnace. The process oxidised the lead, which was then gradually removed as little charge, leaving the silver. The whole process was, as you can see, was reasonably complex. This is part of a water jacket furnace. It's one of the jackets that contain the water. There's scattered remains of this around the Sunny Corner site. Following the success of smelting at Sunny Corner in December 1885, the next few years were very busy for Monte as he undertook consulting work and contracts to erect smelters across Australia and New Zealand. In 1885, Monte was constructing a smelter on the Thames Goldfields in New Zealand, making several trips to the area, marrying his second wife. But however, it was an absolute disaster. And if you talk to New Zealand experts on mining, they will tell you about Monte because it was an absolute disaster. Many people lost money. The New South Wales and Queensland Manufacturing Company was involved in smelter construction at Ravensworth and possibly at Mount Morgan in the late 1884. This venture also ended in legal action between the partners. There was a proposal to construct a smelter in the suburb of Sydney called Clyde. This proposal didn't proceed. Instead, a smelter was erected at the suburb of Spotswood in Melbourne at the mouth of the Yarra River, which opened in August 1885. The aim of these smelters was to take small loads of silver ore from struggling mines and smelt them and then provide a little bit of money to keep these mines operating. It was actually quite a logical sort of thing because small silver mines in New South Wales often sent their silver to Swansea or even to Freiburg for smelting, so it took a long time to get there and the profits took a long time to get back. At the same time, the silver fields in the far west of New South Wales, almost as far west as you can go from New South Wales and still be in New South Wales, at the town of Silverton, surprisingly, which is, as you can see, located roughly here. There was a huge boom in 1885. Monte erected smelters at the Pinnacles and at the Daydream mine, and this was on behalf of the Barrier Ranges Association, which was a group of mines that were coming together to share resources because way out there, there was very little resources to share, and they needed to organise things like firewood and access to transport. Ore from the Silverton field was also transported to the International Smelting Company in Melbourne for processing. In 1885, a promising but unproven mine owned by the Broken Hill Proprietary Limited sent 50 tonnes of ore to Melbourne to treat. The ore yielded 7,000 pounds, and the results, when announced in October 1885, created a sensation and proved the richness of Broken Hill's line of lode, which is still mined 130 years later. BHP then accepted Monte's tender to construct the first smelters at BHP, and while these were being constructed, the ore was smelted at the Daydream smelters or at Melbourne. The BHP smelters were opened in June 1886. So this is a slightly fuzzy aerial of the Daydream, remains of the Daydream smelters, and you can see there is a reasonable amount there. I was only able to be there for a short period of time, but I would like to go back and do a proper survey. As you can imagine, when you've made a vast amount of money, you can do this sort of stuff. This is supposedly Monte smelters commemorated in silver at Broken Hill. And these are the remains of what we think were where the smelters were located, but they were probably heavily modified. So this particular period, 1885, marks the highlight of Monte's career. but then his business declined due to failures in his smelting ventures. The underlying problem was that ores that were on the surface and near the surface were oxidized to some extent, and therefore a lot more easily to treat by the process Monte used. When they got deeper, they got more complex and difficult to treat. And Monte was unable to really fall back on any sort of expertise to try and modify the approaches to continue to produce the required amount of bullion. At Sunny Corner, for example, an extensive system of roasting heaps and stalls were installed to pre-treat the ore prior to smelting. Eventually, the whole plant was reconstructed in 1888 and then again in 1890. At BHP, the directors, and this is the smart thing that BHP did, was use the money that they'd made to import the best available mine managers from the US. Metallurgist Herman Slapp arrived in 1887 to take charge of the processing plant and almost immediately began to modify the smelters and eventually erected new ones in 1888. There were, of course, other reasons for failures. Lack of payable ore, particularly at the Daydream mine and the Pinnacles, was a big problem. There was also a lack of capital and expertise once Monte's men left after 90 days. However, these were overlooked. In the age of the engineers, Monte was held to account, a blowhard Yank promising much but delivering little. After his death in November 1894, the barrier miner, commenting on his career, said, "Mr. Monte's star, which had blazed out so brightly, began to lose its brilliance. Soon it was lost altogether below the horizon, and when Mr. Slapp came, the old hands resolved that the earlier man was not a star at all, but only a comet." So to conclude, the technology that Monte imported was the smelting of silver lead oils in a wet water jacket furnace, as used in the Eureka mine in Nevada and elsewhere on the west coast of America. He brought out patents and know-how, and initially examples of water jacket smelters were imported, but it's difficult to assess how important these were. There were also other people who came out with him who have really not been properly documented in the historical record that may have actually provided the direct experience that Monte lacked. Monte also brought out Yankee enthusiasm. His success was his skill in persuading investors to see the vision of profitable mines and profitable smelting companies. As such, he was more of an enabler than an engineer. He got things going by his enthusiasm rather than by being content to provide abstract technical advice. Yet once technical trouble occurred, he preferred to move on and on to new fields, ending his life as the manager of a Garden Gully mine in Western Australia. The impact he had was in bringing silver smelting technology that stimulated investment in silver mines, because the investors and the mine managers could see a method for processing ore quickly rather than shipping ore overseas. More critically, the 7,000 pounds BHP got from its first ore shipment repaid the previous investments and transformed Broken Hill from a promising mine to a payable mine. Who knows what would have happened if in 1886 Monte was not there with his smelters to process their ore. Thank you very much.